Hello, and welcome back to this ElasticSearch tutorial. Now that we've learned how to search for the information stored within our ElasticSearch indexes, we'll learn of another tool within the Elastic ecosystem that will help us visualize the information that we have stored. This tool is called Kibana. Kibana is simply a tool to help you visualize the data that you have stored in ElasticSearch. Kibana includes a number of graphs by default, such as histograms, line graphs, pie charts, sunbursts, and more, which you can use to visualize the documents in your indexes. Kibana also allows you to search for or to visualize geographic information, time information, and even perform some machine learning to detect patterns on the data that you have stored in ElasticSearch. Kibana is part of the Elastic ecosystem, which means that it's been built from the ground up to be compatible with ElasticSearch. In order to install Kibana, you have a number of options. Like we've done already for ElasticSearch and Logstash, we can simply download a compressed file with the binaries. These are available for Linux, Windows, and Mac, and it's the option that we'll use for the purposes of this tutorial. However, Kibana is also available from package managers for Linux and Mac, and from Docker if you prefer. So let's get our hands dirty and install Kibana and test it out. First, I'm gonna download the Kibana binaries that correspond to my OS, but also to the ElasticSearch version that I'm running, in this case 7.2. To avoid any issues, you should make sure that the version of Kibana that you use matches the version of ElasticSearch that you're using. Once we've downloaded this, we need to extract it, just like we did for ElasticSearch and Logstash. Now, before we move on, you should note that recommended settings for Kibana mean that you shouldn't run this as root. And even though there's an option, by default, Kibana will not run as root. See this, for example. As you can see, I get an error message specifying that Kibana should not be run as root. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm going to run it using the same user that runs my ElasticSearch instance called ElasticSearch. And then change the permissions for all the Kibana files to that user. Now I'm going to switch to that user and run the rest of the commands from there. There is one final thing that we'll need to do. If I run Kibana right now, it will start up, but we will not be able to access it from an external computer. Let's try that. As you can see from the messages, Kibana was started successfully. However, if I try to open it from a browser, I will just get an error that Kibana can't connect. This is because by default, the Kibana installation only allows connections from localhost. Let's change that by editing the config file that's in the config directory called kibana.yml. In here, we have a line that says server.host. We're going to use the IP address for our server for this parameter, and this is going to allow Kibana to connect from an external machine. Let's try now. Once again, you can see that this Kibana server started successfully. But if I go to my browser, Kibana will actually load. Now, before we can do anything, we will need to connect to our Elasticsearch index. Kibana can also accept information from other sources, such as CSV or log files. But for the purposes of this tutorial, we'll use ElasticSearch. First, we need to create an index pattern. This is used so you can choose which indexes are going to show up in Kibana. For this example, I'm just going to use an asterisk as a wildcard, meaning that I can use all the indexes within my ElasticSearch installation. I'm going to select Next Step, and here we can specify a field to use for filtering by time. However, if you recall, the documents that I had on my indexes didn't usually have a time field, with the exception of the document that was input via the command line or the startup input, which added a timestamp to my document. So in this case, we're going to select I don't want to use the time filter and avoid this issue, and then click on Create Index Pattern. This creates an index pattern that can connect to the indexes that you have in ElasticSearch. And here you can see the documents, rather the fields that are within the documents that we have here. You can see the age and the description that we've been using, and you can also see the user and the video date and message fields, which are other fields that we've created throughout this tutorial. So our Kibana installation is pulling information from ElasticSearch. But this would not be very interesting if that's all it did. Luckily, we have more options. For example, let's go to the Discover tab from the left-hand menu. Here, you can select which pattern to use. In this case, I'm going to use the pattern that we just created. Then we have on the left hand side a list of the fields that we can filter by. So let's add the user filter. And here you can see that all the documents that are within my index are showing up, but only showing the user field. Let's add the description. And now you can see that I can see my users, Tom and Victor, and the descriptions for each one, Lauren Epsom, and then this is a test insert, which are the descriptions we created in previous tutorials. If I click here, I can add a new filter for only documents that are called Victor. And I can remove the filter from here. So, from the Discover tab, we will have An easy way to visualize the information on our ElasticSearch indexes, much as if you built a search page using your ElasticSearch installation. Then, if you select the fields on the left side, for example, the username field, the user field, you can see some information about it. You can see that Victor shows up 4 times, which in this case, because we only have 5 records, which the user field set, means 80% of the time, and Tom shows up once, meaning 20% of the time. And here I can click on Visualize and get a graph displaying the same information that we just saw. In this case, Victor having 4 instances and Tom having 1. So as you can see, with very minimal configuration, you can use Kibana to show the information stored within your indexes. You can also use Kibana to build dashboards using this information and to query in more complex ways. But I hope you now have a basic understanding of what Kibana is and how to use it.